Daddy, she's right there. Can't you see her? Rowan cried, his tiny hands pressed against the glass. Jonah's voice thundered through the silence, firm and unyielding. There is no one there, Rowan. Stop this nonsense. But the boy's voice trembled as he pointed again. She's smiling at me. Her name is Elsie. Jonah froze. That name was one he hadn't heard in 6 long years, a name he was told never to speak again. What did his son mean? Who was this little girl he claimed to see every single morning? And how could Maid's courage to follow a child's whisper uncover a truth powerful enough to change everything? Stay with me till the very end, because this story will shake your heart and leave you with a lesson you'll never forget. Hello, my wonderful people, and welcome back to SIR Gentle Stories, the home of powerful, emotional, and life-changing storytelling. To my returning subscribers, thank you from the bottom of my heart for always supporting this channel. To my new viewers, you are highly welcome. I promise you, you just found the right place for stories that don't just entertain, but also inspire and uplift. Before we begin, a quick prayer for everyone watching. May joy never depart from your life. May your home be filled with peace, your hands with abundance, and your heart with love. Whatever you are believing for, may this week bring you closer to it. Amen. If you're new here, please subscribe and turn on notifications, tap the bell, so you never miss a story that could change the way you see the world. And if this kind of story moves you, please hit the like button. It helps more people find us. Now, let's dive into today's story. The Mercer estate was more than just a house. It was a fortress of glass and stone. Its windows gleamed in the morning light, reflecting manicured gardens, a pond glistening like silver, and tall willows that bent low as if they carried secrets. But inside, the air was cold. The kind of cold that comes not from winter, but from grief that lingers too long. At precisely 9 o'clock each morning, 6-year-old Rowan Mercer padded toward the same window on the second floor, his small palm pressed against the glass, his eyes wide and searching. Then, in a soft but haunting whisper, he said the words that had become a ritual in the house. Over there, Mommy again. There. He would point with all the urgency in his tiny frame, his voice quivering with certainty. But no matter how many times he said it, no one listened. Imagination, the staff would mutter. A child's condition, the tutors would say. And Jonah Mercer, his father, billionaire tycoon, sharp in every deal but blind in his own home, would dismiss it entirely. Until one autumn morning, a new maid named Abigail Brooks arrived. Abby was not the kind of woman people noticed in a crowd. Her hair was always escaping its bun, her dress plain, her smile kind but guarded. She had not come to the Mercer estate to chase dreams. She came for survival, for the steady paycheck that would cover bills and keep her afloat. But what made Abby different was the way she saw people. Where others saw Rowan as a puzzle, Abby saw a boy. Where others ignored his whispers, she leaned closer. On her first morning, she noticed him at the window, pointing with fierce concentration. She crouched to his level. "What do you see, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Rowan tapped the glass twice, his lips trembling. "Mommy again." There. Abby followed his small finger toward the distant grove of maple trees. The branches were twisted. Shadows knotted together like dark veins. Nothing stirred. No gardener. No neighbor. Just stillness. But Rowan's gaze did not waver. From the staircase above, Jonah's voice cut in, smooth yet cold. "You'll only encourage him if you play along." Abby looked up. Jonah stood tall, every inch of him composed. Tailored suit, polished shoes, eyes hard as steel behind his glasses. He didn't look at Rowan when he spoke. It was as if his son didn't exist. "Maybe encouragement is exactly what he needs," Abby replied before she could stop herself. Jonah's brow arched. No one contradicted him in his own house. Days turned into a rhythm. Rowan pointed. Abby watched. Jonah dismissed. Yet something gnawed at Abby's heart. Rowan wasn't pointing randomly. His finger always traced the same patch of trees, as though he was certain of what he saw. One crisp October morning, Abby made up her mind. She slipped Rowan into his coat, coaxing him with a smile. "Let's go on an adventure." He hated shoes, hated jackets, but somehow, When Abby's hand held his, he allowed it. That trust stirred something deep inside her, a protective fire that wouldn't let her ignore him. Together they crossed the garden, boots crunching against fallen leaves. The air was sharp with the smell of damp earth. Rowan tugged her hand toward the grove, his steps urgent, and there it was. Half hidden by branches stood an old wooden swing. The ropes frayed, the seat weather-worn, but still swaying gently as if someone had just been there. Rowan stopped, his eyes locked on the swing. He raised his hand again. "Mommy there." Abby's pulse quickened. "Do you mean someone was here?" Rowan pressed closer to her side. His eyes glistened. And then, just for a moment, Abby saw it too. A flicker, white fabric, the shape of a child darting between the trees. Her breath caught. She blinked. The figure was gone. Rowan smiled. For the first time since she'd known him, he truly smiled. "Mommy," he whispered. That night, Abby tried to tell Jonah over dinner. He sat at the far end of the long oak table, tie loosened, but his face still guarded. "He led me to the grove today," she began carefully. "There's an old swing." He pointed to it. Jonah's hand tightened around his glass. "Yes, the swing. My late wife used to take him there." Before, his words trailed, his eyes hardening again. "It's nothing but memory. Don't indulge it." "But he keeps saying he sees someone," Abby pressed. "And Jonah," he smiled today, for the first time in months. "Doesn't that mean something?" His gaze snapped to hers, sharp enough to still her breath. "You're here to care for him, not to chase ghosts." The silence stretched, heavy as stone. She should have dropped it, should have retreated like the others. But Abby's heart would not let her. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the ghosts are the only ones still trying to tell us the truth." For the briefest moment, Jonah's mask cracked. Grief flickered across his face like lightning before it disappeared again. "Good night, Miss Brooks." But Jonah didn't sleep. Whiskey in hand, he wandered the halls, pausing at windows he usually ignored. His son's words echoed in the stillness. "Mommy again." "There." "Upstairs." Abby checked on Rowan. The boy slept curled around a blanket, his breath even, his face peaceful. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and whispered a promise. "We'll find out, Rowan. Whatever you're seeing, I'll find it." And in that moment, she knew. The mystery of the window was only the beginning. The following days felt strangely alive. The Mercer estate was the same grand fortress. But for Abby, every window, every hallway seemed to whisper with secrets. Rowan continued his ritual, his little hands pressed against the glass, his eyes locked on the grove. Yet something had changed. When Abby asked him what he saw, he no longer just whispered, "Mommy." He sometimes smiled, sometimes tapped the glass twice, as if signaling to someone invisible. Abby's curiosity burned brighter each day. She couldn't ignore the boy's certainty, nor the flicker she had seen with her own eyes. One afternoon, as the autumn light painted the walls amber, Rowan tugged her hand more urgently than usual. "Come," he whispered. "Where to, Rowan?" Abby asked, kneeling. His eyes glistened. "Elsie." Abby's chest tightened. That was the first time he had ever spoken the name. "Elsie," she repeated. "Is that her name?" Rowan nodded and tugged her hand toward the stairs. His urgency left no room for doubt. They crossed the gardens, boots crunching on fallen leaves, until they reached the grove. The air smelled of rain-soaked bark and earth. And there, by the old wooden swing, stood a little girl. She couldn't have been older than Rowan. Her chestnut curls framed a pale face, and her dress fluttered in the wind. She looked straight at Rowan, her lips parting in recognition. Abby froze. This wasn't a trick of the light. She was real. Rowan's voice trembled with joy. "Elsie!" The girl smiled faintly, then turned and darted deeper into the grove. Rowan tried to follow, but Abby pulled him back, heart pounding. When she glanced again, the child was gone. Rowan clung to her side, whispering, "Elsie, come back." Abby's hand shook. The mystery was no longer just Rowan's imagination. She had seen her too. That night, Abby gathered her courage to face Jonah in the library. He sat near the fire, the flames reflecting off his glasses, his expression carved in stone. I need to tell you something, Abby began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Jonah looked up briefly. What is it? I saw her. The girl in the grove. Rowan called her Elsie. She looked right at him. Jonah? He stiffened, setting down his glass with deliberate care. Don't do this, Abby. I'm not making this up. She was there. You can't ignore this anymore. Jonah rose sharply, his voice slicing through the room. Do you think I haven't heard stories before? Staff making claims. Tutors whispering nonsense? Do you think I don't know my own life? Abby stepped closer, unflinching. Then tell me, Jonah, why did Rowan know her name? His jaw tightened. His eyes darkened with something between fury and pain. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Finally, his voice broke, low and raw. My wife, she wanted another child. She got pregnant again. But the delivery, he swallowed hard, the words catching his throat, wasn't supposed to end like that. They told me only one survived. That Rowan was all I had left. Abby's breath caught. Her pulse thundered. You're saying there should have been two? She whispered. Jonah's eyes met hers, haunted. They told me the second child died. Abby laid a trembling hand on his sleeve. What if they were wrong? Jonah didn't pull away this time. His silence was not rejection. It was the weight of hope he was terrified to carry. My friends, at this point, what do you think Rowan is really seeing? Could it be a sister? Or something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your theories. And don't forget to hit like if the story has kept you watching so far. The days that followed blurred with tension. Jonah, though reluctant, finally agreed to hire a private investigator at Abby's insistence. Yet his disbelief still lingered like a shadow. At night, Abby found him pacing the halls, restless and tired. Once, she came across him in the kitchen. Sleeves rolled up, tie undone, a man stripped of his usual armor. Couldn't sleep? She asked softly. He looked up, startled. You too. She gave a half-smile. It's hard to rest when you feel like half the house is keeping secrets. For the first time, Jonah almost smiled. He poured a second glass of wine and slid it across the counter to her. Abby hesitated, then accepted. They sat in silence, sipping, the crackle of the kitchen clock filling the space between them. But this silence wasn't cold. It was alive with unspoken words. You're not like the others, Jonah said finally. Abby tilted her head. Because I don't walk away? He shook his head slowly. Because you make me wonder if I've been wrong all this time. His words startled her. She felt something shift between them, subtle yet undeniable. Vulnerability did not suit Jonah Mercer, yet in that moment, it made him human. Abby set her glass down gently. Sometimes, being wrong is the only way to find the truth. Jonah's gaze lingered on her lips before he caught himself and looked away. You should get some rest, Abby. When she rose, his hand brushed hers on the counter. The contact was brief, accidental perhaps, but it burned through her like fire. Good night, Mr. Mercer, she whispered, her voice trembling. And as she walked away, she knew neither of them would sleep that night. 2 nights later, the storm came. Rain pounded the windows. Thunder shook the walls. Rowan stirred in his sleep, crying out for Elsie. Abby rushed into his room, gathering him in her arms. She rocked him, humming softly until his sobs quieted. When she turned, Jonah stood in the doorway. His hair was wet, his shirt clung to his chest. Mud stained his shoes. He had been outside searching, in the storm, desperate for proof. Their eyes met, and something unspoken surged between them. You shouldn't have to carry this alone, Jonah said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Neither should you, Abby replied, her chest tightening. In that storm-lit moment, restraint crumbled. Jonah stepped forward, his hand cupping her face. For an instant, he hesitated. Then Abby leaned into his touch. Their lips met, tentative at first, then urgent. The kiss was not polished, not practiced. It was raw, filled with years of grief and the spark of something new. Abby's fingers curled into his damp shirt. Jonah pressed her back against the wall, his touch gentle yet hungry, as if every movement asked, Is this real? Do you want this too? When Abby whispered yes, it was more than consent. It was surrender. The storm outside raged, but inside, something else was born, not just desire, but connection. And Abby knew, as Jonah held her, that this was only the beginning, of truth, of passion, of love too dangerous and too necessary to deny. But when dawn broke, reality returned. Abby moved quietly through the halls, tending to Rowan, her lips still tingling with the memory of Jonah's kiss. She wondered if he regretted it. She wondered if she should. Yet every time she glanced at him across the breakfast table, his eyes betrayed a flicker of the same confusion. And something deeper. Rowan, oblivious to the storm between adults, pressed his hands to the glass once more. "Elsie," he whispered, tapping twice. Jonah's shoulders stiffened. Abby caught his gaze. For the first time, he didn't look away. "Enough?" Jonah muttered, pushing back his chair. But his voice lacked conviction. He stalked toward the window, staring out into the grove as though daring it to reveal its secrets. His fists clenched at his sides. Abby approached gently. "Jonah, he's not imagining this." Jonah's jaw worked, his breath shallow. "If she's out there, if I've been lied all these years," his voice trailed, heavy with rage and grief. Abby laid a hand on his arm. "Then we'll find out. Together." Jonah didn't reply, but the silence between them was no longer cold. It was a fragile agreement, a promise unspoken. That night, the investigator returned with a folder that seemed to weigh more than stone. Jonah received it with trembling hands, his face pale. Abby stayed by his side, her heart hammering. The truth was near. And as Jonah opened the file, he whispered, almost to himself, "Elsie." The name cracked in his throat, like a prayer finally spoken. That night, silence pressed heavy over the Mercer estate. Only the fire crackled as Jonah opened the investigator's folder with trembling fingers. Abby sat beside him, her heart beating so loud she thought he might hear it. Inside were hospital records, birth charts, adoption papers, the kinds of documents that should have been simple, identical, consistent. But they weren't. The investigator spoke carefully. "Mr. Mercer, there were 2 births. Rowan was recorded first. The second infant was declared stillborn, but the paperwork is inconsistent. Look here, signatures that don't match, timelines that don't align. And this, an unofficial adoption trail. Someone moved the child off record." Jonah's breath came in sharp bursts. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the pages. "They told me she died," he whispered, his voice raw. "They lied," the investigator replied quietly. "Your daughter survived, and I've traced her. She's alive." The world seemed to tilt. Jonah sank into his chair, his face pale, eyes wide with fury and grief. Abby touched his arm gently, grounding him as the storm of truth crashed over him. "Elsie," Jonah breathed, "she's real." 2 weeks later, the reunion unfolded. The estate's doors opened not to servants or investors, but to a social worker who guided a small girl forward. She clutched a worn stuffed rabbit to her chest, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Abby's hand flew to her mouth. It was the same girl from the grove. Chestnut curls, pale skin, eyes that mirrored Rowan's. Rowan stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase. For a moment, silence reigned. Then he bolted forward with a cry. "Elsie!" The girl's face lit up. She dropped the rabbit and ran to him. They collided in the middle of the hall, arms wrapping around each other in an embrace so fierce, so instinctive, that everyone watching felt the air shift. Jonah staggered a step closer, his lips trembling. He felt his knees, reaching out with unsteady hands. Elsie's gaze flicked to him, wary. But when Rowan tugged her hand, she stepped forward. Jonah gathered them both into his arms, his body shaking as sobs broke free, the sound of man finally breaking after years of silence. Abby turned away briefly, tears streaming down her own cheeks. This was no longer just Jonah's revelation. It was Rowan's healing. The days that followed were a blur of adjustments. Rowan and Elsie became inseparable, their bond as natural as breathing. They played at the old swing in the grove, laughter ringing through branches that had once held only shadows. Jonah, meanwhile, shifted before Abby's eyes. The hardened billionaire who once buried his grief behind contracts and suits was now a father rediscovering his children. She watched him pause longer at their sides, laugh more often, soften in ways she hadn't thought possible. And yet, the storm of scandal brewed outside. The investigators' findings sparked lawsuits, media attention, and whispers that threatened Jonah's empire. Reporters camped outside the gates. Headlines blared accusations of medical corruption and cover-ups. Through it all, Abby remained at his side, not as an employee, but as something more. She managed the children, yes, but she also steadied Jonah when his temper threatened to spiral, when guilt crushed his chest, when exhaustion bent his shoulders. One evening, after the children were asleep, Jonah stood by the study window. The city lights glittered in the distance, but his gaze was turned inward. "They stole years from me," he said quietly. "From her, from Rowan, and I let them. I didn't question enough. I believed what I was told." Abby approached, laying a hand on his back. "You believe because you were grieving. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Jonah turned, eyes shining with vulnerability. He could no longer hide. "How do I make it right, Abby? How do I give them back what I lost?" "You don't," she said softly. "You can't rewrite the past, but you can give them today, and tomorrow, and every day after that." Jonah's jaw trembled. He closed the space between them, his hands cupping her face, as if she were the only thing tethering him to the earth. Abby leaned into him, her lips brushing his in a kiss not of passion, but of promise. In that moment, the billionaire and the maid disappeared. Only a father and a woman who believed in him remained. My friends, what would you do if you discovered years later that the child you thought you lost was alive all along? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story like this. The next morning, Abby found Jonah outside watching Rowan and Elsie play in the grove. His face carried something new, peace, however fragile. He glanced at her and whispered, "I don't deserve this." Abby stepped close, her voice firm. "You do. They do. And they need you, Jonah. Not the billionaire. Not the armor. Just you." For the first time in years, Jonah smiled without restraint. And when he reached for Abby's hand, she didn't pull away. Together, they stood in the sunlight, watching the children who had once been divided by lies but were now united by truth. And for the first time, the Mercer estate no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like home. In the weeks that followed, the Mercer estate seemed transformed. Where once silence reigned, now laughter echoed. Rowan no longer pointed at the window. He pointed at Elsie, tugging her by the hand toward the swing. Their giggles floated through the grove like music, as if the trees themselves rejoiced at their reunion. Jonah watched them with a quiet awe. The billionaire who had once measured life in profits and contracts now measured it in smiles, in the weight of small hands in his, in bedtime stories that stretched too long, because neither child wanted the night to end. And through it all, Abby was there. Her presence, once confined to chores and duties, had become something far greater. She was their anchor, the bridge between grief and hope. One night, after the children had finally drifted to sleep, Jonah sought her out. He found her in the study, tidying the papers that never seemed to leave his desk. "You don't have to do that," he said softly, leaning against the doorframe. She glanced up, a smile tugging at her lips. "Someone has to keep this place from drowning in paperwork." Jonah stepped closer, his voice lower now. "Abby, you've done more than anyone else ever could. For Rowan, for Elsie, for me." Her eyes softened. "I only did what needed to be done." "No," Jonah insisted, his gaze locking onto hers. "You did what no one else dared. You believed when I couldn't. You fought when I had given up." Abby's throat tightened. She tried to look away, but Jonah reached out, lifting her chin gently until her eyes met his again. "I can't imagine this house without you," he whispered. Her heart raced. "Jonah," but his lips silenced her doubts, pressing against hers with a tenderness that left her breathless. This kiss was not like the storm. It was slower, deeper, filled with gratitude and longing. Abby melted into him. her hands resting against his chest as though to steady the rush of emotion flooding her. Jonah's arms encircled her, pulling her close, as though letting go would undo everything they had rebuilt. When at last they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered, "not as the maid, not as the help. Stay as part of us." Tears pricked her eyes. "I never wanted to leave." And in that moment, everything unspoken between them finally found its voice. From that night on, their bond deepened. Jonah and Abby no longer danced around their feelings. They embraced them. Late evenings became theirs, filled with laughter, stolen kisses, and whispered dreams. Yet it wasn't just romance. It was partnership. Abby helped Jonah face the public storm, standing beside him as he filed lawsuits against the hospital and confronted the corruption that had stolen years from his family. The media called it the Mercer redemption. Headlines painted him not as a ruthless billionaire, but as a father fighting for truth. He no longer hid behind boardrooms. He spoke openly about grief, about autism, about the children he nearly lost. And each time he appeared before the cameras, Abby's presence beside him gave his words weight. She was no longer invisible. She was a quiet strength the world couldn't ignore. At home, the children thrived. Rowan, once withdrawn, blossomed with Elsie by his side. He spoke more, laughed more, reached for her hand when words failed. Elsie, too, shed her shyness, her giggles lighting the halls that had once been haunted by silence. One crisp December morning, Abby found the two of them curled together by the fireplace, drawing with crayons. Rowan held up his picture proudly. "It's us," he said softly. "Me, Elsie, Mommy." Abby's breath caught. The picture showed not just the twins, but a woman with flowing hair standing beside them, his late mother. She glanced at Jonah, who stood in the doorway. His eyes shimmered with tears he didn't bother to hide. "He remembers her," Abby whispered. Jonah nodded, voice breaking. "And he's ready to let her memory live, without fear." Abby placed a hand over his. "You all are friends. Isn't it beautiful how love and truth can heal even the deepest wounds? If this story has touched you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles still happen. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Spring arrived, and with it, new beginnings. Jonah established a foundation in his late wife's name, funding research for autism support and fighting corruption in the medical system. He insisted Abby take a leading role, her insight and compassion shaping its mission. At the launch event, cameras flashed as Jonah stood at the podium. But when he spoke, his voice was not the polished tone of a CEO. It was raw, heartfelt. "They told me my daughter was gone. They told me to bury my questions, my grief. But the truth has a way of surviving. Today, my family is whole again. And I will spend the rest of my life ensuring no parent, no child ever faces what we did." The audience erupted in applause. Jonah stepped down, his eyes finding Abby in the crowd. She smiled, pride radiating from her. And when he reached for her hand before the cameras, he no longer cared about appearances. He wanted the world to see her for who she truly was in his life. At night, when the speeches and cameras faded, life returned to its truest form. Jonah reading to the children by the fire, Abby tucking Elsie's curls behind her ear, Rowan humming softly as he drew. And sometimes, when the children were asleep, Jonah and Abby would sit together in Grove, the old swing creaking gently in the breeze. He would wrap his arm around her waist, his lips brushing her temple as he whispered, "No more ghosts, only truths." Abby would smile, leaning into him. And only love. Years later, the Mercer estate no longer looked like a fortress. It was filled with warmth, children's laughter, framed drawings on the walls, Abby's handwriting scattered among Jonah's papers. And every morning, Rowan still went to the window. But now, instead of pointing outward into shadows, he pointed inward toward his sister waiting by the swing. Together, they would run into the Grove, where joy had replaced sorrow. And Abby, standing beside Jonah, knew the truth. Love had not only healed a broken family, it had rewritten their future. Dear friends, I hope this story has inspired you as much as it inspired me to tell it. If it touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone you care about, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to Sir Gentle's Stories and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a tale of hope, love, and life lessons. Until next time, may your days be filled with light and your nights with peace.